goes. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is the trophy horse of international human rights law, has been ratified, legally accepted by 191 countries in the world. 5 more than the complete membership of the United Nations. And we always, myself included, and my sincere apologies, take a great deal of malicious pleasure in pointing out that the only 2 countries in the world that have not ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child are Somalia and the United States of America. Somalia can't ratify because since 1991 it hasn't had a government. So there is nobody really to ratify. United States of America has problems. One problem is that still the position of the US government is that there is no such thing as economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to education, which is still the Cold War hangover when we had United States advocating civil and political rights, Soviet Union and her allies advocating a version of socio-economic rights. And this carries on. So, while the Convention on the Rights of the Child, similarly to Convention on Human Rights of Women, deals with the right to education, with freedom of expression, with political participation, with rights of children with disabilities, rights whether they are civil or economic or political or cultural altogether, which means that to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child or Convention on Human Rights of Women, the government would have to officially, explicitly change its ideological and political position. I don't know whether it's possible, but it would be a big change. The other obstacle is acceptance, conceptual acceptance of the notion that children have rights, which is very difficult. Which means if we are talking education in the United States, according to US law as interpreted by courts, we will still give rights to parents relating to education of their children. We will not give 10 or 12-year-olds in the United States the right of choice in terms of religious education, in terms of sex education. Rather, we would ask their parents. So if the United States of America were to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child, it would have to persuade the subtotal of existing and future parents that in the case of a conflict between a right of the child and parental rights, it's the right of the child that gets preference, which is, again, a huge ideological difference. The third obstacle is that a Convention on the Rights of the Child, different from all other human rights treaties, has a very strong development cooperation orientation. And it was based on good intentions. UNICEF, United Nations Children's Fund, has become, in the history of humanity, the first development agency that is implementing the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is a fantastic development because it has never happened before, that human rights were actually incorporated into development programs. Which means that if the United States of America were to ratify Convention on the Rights of the Child, it would also have to change its aid policy, which is now that aid is discretionary. It is US decision, political decision, not challengeable, not appealable, whether to give aid, whether to deny aid. Which means that I could go on with other reasons, but I will stop with these 3, that this ratification would not be of minor political and legal importance, but rather than major. Yes?
As an advocate of children's rights, do you ever see them in conflict with cultural obligations of particular communities, whether they be in Asia, Africa, or Latin America?
Yes, very much so. One issue which is terrible is child marriage. The reason why I'm saying that it's terrible is that it is literally whatever cultural gloss is put on top of it, it is sale of children. It's the sale and purchase of girls who can be as young as 8, 9, or 10, and who then become mothers while they are still small children. The cultural justification behind it is based on the notion of marriage being a contract between two families. And again, the legal implication is denial of rights. There is no such thing as the right of the child to say no, because the child is the object of the contract. As you can see, I hope that you can see it. Can you see it in the back?
No.
Can we make it bigger? Yes, I will. I will move them. If you hear a big boom, I mean, it's not... It's better. If one looks at what child marriage means for girls, you will see that in countries such as Angola, former Zaire, Congo, Guinea, Liberia, Niger, Sierra Leone, Somalia, that it is customary, it's still practice, that girls get married off at the age of puberty, as soon as they can biologically conceive a child, they will be married. And which means no schooling, definitely. Which means because they are biologically capable of pregnancy and childbirth, but really not strong enough to cope with it, it is outright mortal. It means that if one wants to challenge the cultural practice of tolerating arranged marriages, then the government obtains in human rights not the role of letting the individuals organize themselves whichever way they please, but rather starting through a combination of carrot and stick, by the stick prohibiting child marriages and enforcing the prohibition. Through the carrot, trying to educate the next generations so that arranged marriage is no longer accepted because people not only know better in theory, but they have also seen that girls can go to school, they can be teachers, they can open their own business. If one thinks about the clash of ideologies, if you wish, then the biggest obstacles to recognition of rights of children and rights of women are on the family level, within the family, within the community, which then necessitates for any government in the world to take up a battle against community leaders, against religious leaders, which is something that most governments are not willing to do because it is difficult. In purely legal realm, what we have in most African and Asian countries is that our international human rights law is completely irrelevant. Because the country's constitution, I'll take India as an example, is the biggest one. According to India's constitution, international human rights